Francis Egan, who they've been drilling for fracking wells in Lancashire before that moratorium was introduced. Mr. Egan, welcome to the BBC News Channel. How long ago did you find out that this moratorium was going to be lifted?
I found out when the rest of the world found out, when the Prime Minister announced it in the House of Parliament about 2 weeks ago. And of course, due to the sad events of the Queen's passing, we waited until today to have it officially confirmed in the written ministerial statement. And I commend the government for doing it. I think it's a very sensible and badly needed decision. Why,
when there's so much opposition to it, particularly amongst in the communities where you'd actually be operating?
Well, a large part of the opposition to our original planning application in Lancashire didn't come from Lancashire, and a good portion of it didn't even come from the UK. So I think there are a lot of people who are in favour of it, and furthermore, given the energy price rises and the commitment by ourselves and other industry players to put a significant portion of revenues back into the local community, there will be a lot of support for it.
Well, clearly, listening to the politicians in the House of Commons this morning, that's wrong. There is a huge amount of opposition. They've just said so.
Well, you know, politicians on one side say one thing, politicians on the other side say another thing. But
that doesn't mean sorry, Mr. Egan, but that doesn't mean that you can ignore those who are on the side that's saying that we don't want this, and neither do our voters.
I'm not ignoring anybody. I'm not ignoring the people who are.
You've just said that there's not a lot of opposition in this country. It's from outside. That isn't true.
Actually, what I said was that a large part of the opposition to our original planning application came from outside this country, and that is factually correct. You can go to Lancashire County Council planning and check that on the record.
Okay, so then how do you answer? So how then do you answer the opposition that you've just heard this morning? It's very vocal opposition, an alarm that the government is going down this route.
Well, I actually haven't heard everything that's been said in the House of Commons. I've just come on to your programme now, but the rationale for this is very sensible and well evident. The country is going to need gas for decades to come. We're currently importing increasing quantities of shale gas from the United States, higher emissions than what we can produce ourselves, with no benefit to this country. So we should be developing our own resource, increasing tax revenues, benefits for local communities, financial benefits, and of course energy self-sufficiency, all of which make entirely sensible decisions.
How can then fracking help the UK squeeze on energy? Can you quantify it for us? How much difference is it going to make, and what impact will it have on the average household bill?
Well, the decision to explore and hopefully produce shale gas is not something that is going to impact household bills tomorrow. Nothing is going to impact household bills tomorrow.
When will it, and to what extent?
Well, the resource estimate for shale gas in the United Kingdom is that there are over 50 years' worth of supply. So it has the potential to help us towards energy self-sufficiency and not be reliant at all on gas imports. So it can have a very major impact. One producing site could generate hundreds of millions of pounds in local community benefits alone. So there's very significant financial and energy security benefits to be had in developing this resource.
How quickly?
It depends how quickly we can get the consent to go ahead. We've heard this morning that the government has lifted the moratorium. That's a fantastic first step. We need to hear the detail of what they're saying on the regulatory limits. And of course, we need to go through the planning process, as does everybody else. So we need to take those steps. But once they're taken, we could be flowing shale gas from initial wells, initially in small quantities, within 6 months from our existing site.
But the geology hasn't changed, so the risk hasn't changed, has it?
Well, the geology hasn't changed, so the gas is still there. The government has said, and we agree with them, that the risks are no different than the risks being applied to other energy extractive projects, including geothermal, mining and quarrying, all of which we've been doing successfully and will continue to do for many years in this country.
But
so why should shale gas be treated differently?
The risk was deemed to be unacceptable, and that risk hasn't changed because the underlying geology hasn't changed.
As I say, the risk is no different to other extractive industries, geothermal, mining, quarrying, all of which we have and continue to be doing successfully. So why should shale gas be treated differently?
Francis Egan, CEO of Quadrilla, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We will, of course, be getting a range of responses to this announcement throughout the day here on the BBC News Channel. But let's speak to our business correspondent, Theo Leggett. You were watching what was happening in the House of Commons. A lot of consternation from some quarters, Theo, about this announcement.
Absolutely, and this goes back years, that there are arguments in favour of fracking in terms of energy security, that kind of thing, and there have been arguments in the United States and elsewhere about what the potential dangers of fracking are. Fracking involves pumping water, sand and chemicals deep underground to smash rocks apart under high pressure. And there are concerns, for example, that that can lead to earthquakes, that it can lead to pollution of the water table. What I thought was quite significant during the debate in the House of Commons there was that the Business Secretary kept on referring back to a report in 2012. Now, one of the reasons for that is there's very little information for the government or for opponents of fracking to go on, because in this country so far, only 3 experimental wells have been drilled, and they had to shut down before work on them was complete. So we don't know a huge amount. We don't know exactly how much gas is down there. Francis Egan there said 50 years worth of supply. Well, possibly, but estimates vary from hundreds of billions of cubic metres of gas underground to tens of trillions of cubic metres. And we don't know how much of that is recoverable. So there's an awful lot that is unknown here.
The argument is that it will help with energy security. We can produce our own energy at a time when energy is costing a huge amount of money. But to what extent is that going to affect people's bills?
Well, the extent to which we can recover it depends on how much is there and how much is recoverable. In terms of people's bills, in the short term, it won't affect bills at all, because at the moment our bills are being pumped up by the effects of the war in Ukraine and the effect that is having on supply. New supplies from fracking are not going to come onto the market for some time. The permits have to be put in place. The research has to be done into how much gas is there and how recoverable it is. So the effects of that will not be felt for many years to come. Now, will it have an effect on prices in the longer term, as Jacob Rees-Mogg suggested? Well, that depends on how much gas there is. Our gas is priced according to international prices. So gas from the North Sea, for example, goes onto the international market where it is sold based on supply and demand in the international market. In order to move those prices, you would have to put a significant amount of extra gas onto the market. And experts I've spoken to say that's unlikely to make a lot of difference.
But we were just talking there to the CEO of Codrilla, and he said, look, in terms of risk, it's no different from other forms of extraction.
Well, that point is also made by the British Geological Survey in a report that the government commissioned earlier this year and that's been published today. It suggests that risks from fracking should be evaluated alongside the risks from other extractive industries in order to improve public transparency. It also does open the door for the kind of policy that the government wants to put in place, where it's suggesting that the red light threshold, where you stop using a well, you shut it down, should be a significant amount superior to the sort of amber level where you shut it down for a pause, and that it implies that there is room for movement here, that the threshold at which a well is shut down could be moved upwards.
Theo, for the moment, thank you very much, Theo Leggett. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Damian Grammaticus. A fairly lively exchange in the House of Commons. I mean, is it split down party lines? Is it that clear, the opposition, Damian?
No, I think what was interesting was you were hearing from all across different MPs, different parties, concern about this, including Tory MPs. We had Tory MPs standing up, very worried about this idea of consent, that these would be allowed, that this drilling would be allowed to go ahead with local consent. And the question being asked to the Business Secretary was, well, how will that be measured? What is going to be the gauge of local consent? And he didn't really answer that. He talked about the fact that in some areas where there's nuclear power already in the UK, that communities there support it. And it's therefore, he said, it's possible for local communities to be behind this. But many MPs, many of them from opposition parties, were very, very concerned about that issue. He pointed to, it was interesting that I think what we saw was the Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, pointing to the fact, he said that local communities who backed any projects could get significant compensation. And he even said that he'd been having conversations with the Chancellor about that. We don't know exactly what that might entail, but he was questioned on that too. So the idea that people would get financial benefits if they allowed drilling in their area, the point put to him was, well, compensation is not consent. And the Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, he said, well, they're two sides of the same coin. That drew quite a lot of sort of noise in the chamber too. So some very controversial areas the government is stepping into. But I think what's interesting is if you step back a little bit, two things. The context, if you like, of the war in Ukraine. So the government saying that it has to look at secure energy supplies for the future. And that is one reason for doing this. And for looking at, as Jacob Rees-Mogg was saying, he said, tolerating a higher degree of risk and disturbance appears to us to be in the national interest. So one argument I think they have is the national interest. The other argument I think is also this idea that he said, well, is the Conservative government acting according to market forces? They want to sort of free up market forces to, and that's the sort of philosophical view I think they have to this issue of energy supplies. But as you saw, a lot of opposition from MPs and from local communities.
The front bench, sorry, let me just stress, Damian, that we are talking about England only with this fracking story. It's a different matter in other parts of the United Kingdom. The opposition front bench described as Luddites for their concerns. And then Caroline Lucas saying, you know, from the Green Party, that it's not as easy to protest anymore if you're against these plans.
Yes, I mean, well, the opposition criticism partly is also based on sort of broader aspects too. So we saw Labour's opposition, part of that is saying that fracking is a dangerous fantasy. It does nothing to cut energy bills. It costs much more. Gas will cost much more than renewable energy. And it's saying that this is another broken promise. Remember, this was in the Tory manifesto at the last election, not to expand, not to lift the moratorium unless science showed it could be done safely. But saying that this is a dangerous fantasy, the fossil fuel lobby will be the only ones who benefit. So looking at this in the context of energy security and climate change, they say that this doesn't make sense. Same thing from the Liberal Democrats as well. Liberal Democrats also saying that they felt that this would be, this doesn't make sense in terms of energy security.
Damian, for the moment, thank you very much. Damian Grammaticus there on the latest fracking story.